There was confirmation yesterday from the Minister for Mineral Resources and Energy, Mantashe, that his department has now formulated a proper gas master plan to deal with the problems that will be created when Sasol switches off its pipeline from Mozambique. The gas reserves there are running out. That means industrial gas users will have no supplies from that pipeline from 2026. At the same time, Mantashe says we should be looking at using our own uranium resources to produce our own nuclear energy. Prashaen Reddy is an energy analyst at the consultancy Kearney Prashaen. Good afternoon to you. So the Minister says there's now a gas master plan. Do you know what will be in that plan? What kind of proposals it will have to make?
Good afternoon, Stephen, and thank you for having me. Of course, the gas master plan is similar to the integrated resources plan in that it is a policy instrument that government uses to establish the supply and demand dynamics for gas and how a gas marketplace can be created or further developed in the country. So it gives guidance around that, around how we would develop indigenous resources, but also how, importation of gas resources will also play out. So it's a plan that gives direction around how gas will be developed on the supply and demand side for the country.
So we need direction. We also need action pretty quickly. I mean, 2026 is not that long away. I presume that this plan is vital to get to the action.
I think, that there's a short-term view on the current gas crisis, as you're all aware, and has been well reported. I think certainly there's a need to solve the short-term action. But the gas master plan is not meant to just solve the short-term gas crisis. It's meant to be a guiding plan around all gas development in the country, much more broadly than what exists today. So we actually don't have a fully fledged gas economy in South Africa, and this gas master plan is meant to guide that much bigger picture, probably until the year 2050.
One of the big questions, of course, that I suppose it can't answer is whether it's going to be possible to really have large-scale gas resources being exploited in South Africa. That probably makes it quite difficult, really. I mean, it's difficult to have a plan like this without, when it has to make assumptions based on how much gas there could actually be. Otherwise, we're going to have to get gas from other countries.
I think indications, of course, with the Total finds in the south of the country, as well as the work recently done in the Karoo around shale gas, do indicate that South Africa has significant reserves, as well as the recent finds in Mpumalanga. So there are definitely reserves that have been identified and potential reserves in the country that have been identified. So we do know that the country has gas. The question is, how will we beneficiate this gas, develop it, and really start to industrialize it into our economy?
All of this will have to involve the private sector. I presume the private sector wants to act pretty quickly because of what's going to happen, and I don't know if there's enough trust with the private sector and government.
Yeah, I think this particular topic of the gas master plan and developing the gas economy does require the private and public sector to work together. Just as is the case that we have gas from Mozambique, where we've had to have the South African government, the Mozambican government, and Sasol some time ago work together to establish the gas pipeline that crosses both countries, access the reserves in Mozambique, and of course then develop the downstream gas consumers that we now have today in South Africa that use that gas. I think we've had a model like that successfully work in the past, and I think that needs to be replicated when we think about building more gas infrastructure and developing a bigger gas economy in South Africa. You're quite right. We have to work together, the private and public sector, and I think there has to be trust in that, in doing that. If we're ever to really pursue and develop this agenda in South Africa. And it's for the benefit of both, the public sector as well as the private sector to actually develop gas in South Africa.
The comments by the Minister yesterday about nuclear energy, I don't know if you were following them as closely as you were the situation in gas, but he seems to be saying that we will develop nuclear generation capacity, and this has been the sort of phrase that government's used for some time, at the kind of speed and capacity or scale and capacity that we can afford. How do you interpret that? Do you think that we are going to have a lot more nuclear generating capacity in the next 10 years or so?
Well, firstly, nuclear is, in its traditional sense, is a long-term, development life cycle. It's also quite expensive as a technology, but the big benefit of nuclear is it's a low carbon source. So it doesn't emit carbon as coal-fired power stations do, for example. But the development, I would say, in the nuclear space has been that, small modular nuclear reactors, which are quicker to develop, are on smaller scale and easier to implement. It cuts down implementation time between 3 to 4 years. And so you could do those quicker and at smaller scale, and they're cleaner energy. So certainly that could help with the power crisis. And as I say, that it is a low form of carbon emission type power technology.
It's still going to take a while, though. I mean, it's still quite expensive to set up, and it's still quite a way away, I suppose. Bless you. Still quite a way away until we get that kind of power into our system. I mean, probably at least a decade.
Well, yeah, of course it depends. Certainly within the next 10 years is a reasonable time frame to include nuclear, especially if it's going to be on a small modular reactor scale. So yes, it is a longer term play. It's medium to longer term play, but we have to complement that with the existing coal-fired power stations, work we're doing, the gas, the renewables, the hydro. So there has to be a combination of technologies to navigate us. And nuclear could certainly be part of that, especially because it is low emission. But we have to make sure we find the right solution from a timing and a cost perspective, because it can be quite expensive and it can take some time.
As we understand it, Prashaen, if you need to cough, I'll talk for a while. You can. We'll take you off the camera for a minute. But it seems to me one of the questions that the minister sort of posed yesterday was talking about whether we can use uranium resources, which we have. We do have some uranium in South Africa, as I understand it. And he spoke a little bit about our American partners. And I don't know if he really meant partners in the sort of classical sense, if he meant something else. As I understand it, the US often will supply you with fuel for a nuclear reactor. But when that fuel is used, it gets reprocessed into something else. You can use that something else for, how do I put this, other purposes. The Americans take that back. How important is what the minister is saying here, that we should use our own uranium?
Look, we already have a nuclear power station in the country. And of course, using our own resources is useful for the development of our power agenda. I think we have to collaborate with all and work together with all our stakeholders when it comes to nuclear. I think, of course, nuclear is a sensitive topic, and it definitely requires, the engagement of stakeholders on the development of our resources. But I think the minister also made very clear that the intent of developing resources in South Africa is for power generation, and we find ourselves in a very challenging space in power, in that we need to be able to use the various technologies that are at our disposal to ensure that we have a balanced response to our energy security crisis. So I think that, with that intention, that is, something that is growing is these SMR nuclear reactors, not just in emerging geographies, but also in Europe. And so it is a potential technology for us to use and utilize resources to help fuel those reactors.
If you look at the situation around gas, lots of assumptions that we have to make. There's some certainty that we still need around the reserves. If we look at the situation around electricity and power, the sector is changing very quickly in the nuclear industry and in the renewable space. It seems to me, Prashaen, it's actually very difficult in government, in the policy space right now, to make any kind of prediction over the next 10 years. Things are moving very quickly, and there are lots of moving parts.
Well, I would say that is the purpose of IRP. It is a plan that is supposed to look to the future, and it does look into two waves, as you will be aware, up until 2030 and then beyond that time frame, around what technologies and when they should be put onto the grid and developed for our energy mix. So it is important to have long-term planning. Lots of things will change and happen as they do in the energy space, and we would have to adapt and respond to that. But we need to put down some short-term, medium-term, and long-term planning to give the market, to give private investors, to give the public certainty around which technologies and when we're going to need to bring on board within our power and energy mix. So I think it is important to have a longer-term view. Of course, we can't predict the future. We can't predict what events are going to happen and how that will have a disruption to our systems. But we need to be able to plan as far as possible so that we can avoid some of the challenges we've had with electricity in this country. So planning is critical to that. Long-term planning is critical to that.
Prashaen Reddy, thank you. Partner at Kearney, the consultancy, really do appreciate that time. Well,